in the shivering dawn of the 18th century, when the world seemed vast and yet cruelly confined by the iron bars of greed and inhumanity, a nightmare was born upon the restless Caesar, floating hell known simply as the slave ship. Imagine, if you dare, the torment that befell those unwilling souls crammed below deck, their bodies shackled, minds tethered to terror, doomed to a voyage where death was not a possibility but an inevitability, and suffering stretched beyond the limits of mortal endurance. You would rot alive on such a vessel, your flesh festering in darkness and filth, swallowed whole by despair. The ship itself was a monstrous contraption, constructed not for comfort but for cruelty. Its decks groaned beneath the weight of human misery, the timbers soaked with the tears, blood, and excrement of hundreds, men, women, and children stripped of their dignity, traded as mere cargo in a ruthless market of flesh. The captains, their faces hardened by greed and a dark necessity, saw not people, but profit. Their orders barked like thunder, indifferent to the cries echoing through the suffocating hold. Below deck, the air was a putrid soup of decay, thick with the stench of sweat and sickness. The slaves were packed so tightly that movement was a cruel jest. There was no space to sit or stand, only the torturous option to lie pressed against one another, their bodies slick with the filth born from days without clean water or fresh air. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of lanterns when the guards descended to count their living cargo. But these were not mercies, rather cruel reminders of the cage that confined them, a tomb afloat on the endless, indifferent ocean. Among them was Kofi, a young man ripped from the sun-drenched coasts of West Africa, his spirit as vibrant as the land he was torn from, now reduced to a shadow crouching in the fetid dark. His thoughts flickered like fragile flames, memories of laughter, of kin now extinguished by the suffocating night of the ship's hold. He clung to a whispered hope, a fragile thread tethering him to life amid the looming specter of death. Disease spread like wildfire through the cramped quarters. Dysentery, smallpox, and scurvy claimed lives with merciless efficiency. The wooden planks beneath became slick with vomit and blood, a macabre testament to the horror unfolding within. And yet, for the captains and crew, each death was a loss of profit, a hole torn in their fortunes. To preserve the cargo, they forced the living into even more unbearable conditions, shackling them tighter, rationing the meager water, and enforcing brutal discipline. On deck, the sun scorched mercilessly, mocking the suffering below. Those fortunate enough to be brought above for the faintest breath of air were often chained on the hot planks, their skin blistering and their souls withering in the searing heat. The cries of those left in darkness seeped into the ears of the indifferent sailors, muffled only by the roar of the sea and the creaking of the ship's timbers. Among the crew, there was Captain Hawthorne, a man whose visage bore the marks of a hard life and a harder conscience. He was no stranger to the darkness beneath his feet, yet ambition blinded him to mercy. His orders were absolute, his gaze cold as the steel shackles that bound the souls below. Yet, beneath this exterior, a tumult brewed, fragments of guilt buried deep, clashing against the iron will that drove him forward. A man torn between the brutal demands of his station and the flickering remnants of humanity he dared not show. As days bled into nights, the line between life and death blurred within the bowels of the ship. The slaves, weakened by starvation and disease, fell silent one by one. Their bodies became nurseries for maggots and worms, the soft flesh rotting away while their minds drifted into an abyss of nightmares and fading memories. The ship moved relentlessly forward, an indifferent beast swallowing the souls entrusted to its care. The horror of the Middle Passage was not merely the passage itself, but the slow erosion of hope, the stripping away of humanity until all that remained was a hollow shell, a testament to the depths of cruelty humanity could descend. Those who survived this living death were forever changed, scarred in body, mind, and spirit, cast into new chains upon distant shores. The ship's bell tolled relentlessly, each clang a cruel reminder of time spent in this hellish purgatory. And as the endless ocean stretched out on all sides, it bore witness to a tragedy vast and unspeakably wound upon the soul of history that continues to haunt us. Beneath the churning waves and boundless sky, the ship groaned on, a cursed ark ferrying souls toward an unknown doom. The men who steered her were men of iron will and cold hearts, yet even their steely resolve faltered in the face of the unbearable cries that rose from below. The screams twisted into something almost unrecognizable, a mournful chorus of despair that clawed at the very fabric of their reason. The creak of the timbers was a sinister symphony to the suffering endured beneath. Among the prisoners was Amina, a woman whose fierce spirit had not yet been broken, though the darkness sought to swallow her whole. Her eyes, sharp and alive, pierced through the void of the hold as if searching for a shred of salvation. She whispered to herself the names of the ancestors, the stories of strength and survival, a fragile shield against the encroaching madness. But even her fierce heart was beginning to fray at the edges, the constant torment chipping away at her resolve. Illness spread its cruel fingers deeper into the cramped quarters. A fever took hold of many, burning their bodies with unnatural heat, leaving them delirious and delirium twisted into rage and despair. They fought the invisible enemy in silence, trapped in the suffocating darkness, their breath ragged and hollow. The ship's surgeons, if one could call them, that were more akin to executioners, administering poisons and amulets with equal ignorance and indifference. Hope was a flickering candle, threatened by the ceaseless winds of torment. Above, Captain Hawthorne paced like a caged beast, the weight of the voyage pressing upon his soul. His nights were haunted by visions of those below deck shackled figures, whose faces swam before his eyes in the flickering candlelight of his cabin. His hands trembled, clenched tight upon the polished wood of his desk. Duty and profit demanded cruelty, yet a flicker of conscience writhed inside him, a serpent constricting his heart. The crew, hardened men, accustomed to brutality, grew restless. Whispers of mutiny simmered in the humid air, fueled by the ceaseless groans from below and the oppressive heat that blistered their skin. But their fear of Captain Hawthorne's wrath kept them tethered, like dogs chained to a sinking ship. Discipline was maintained with iron rods and snarled threats, each lash a reminder of the fragile order governing this hellish voyage. Below, the living dead, those too sick or weak to rise, were dragged out, their bodies discarded overboard like refuse, swallowed by the indifferent ocean. The water churned, dotted with bloated corpses and drifting limbs, a grotesque testament to the cost of greed. The salt air carried the scent of decay, mingling with the stench of sweat and blood, in a miasma that clung to the ship's timbers. Among the condemned was a child named Samuel, no older than 10, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. He clung to the remnants of his mother's shawl, a piece of cloth that smelled faintly of earth and freedom. But even the warmth of that memory could not shield him from the cold reality of the ship's belly. The boy's cries were swallowed quickly by the crushing darkness, unheard by those who passed overhead. As the days dragged onward, the ship sailed deeper into the abyss of human suffering. The line between the living and the dead blurred into obscurity, their bodies intertwined in a grotesque dance of decay and survival. The holds became tombs where the light of humanity flickered and died, snuffed out by neglect and cruelty. Captain Hawthorne's journals, later recovered from the depths of the sea, reveal the torment of a man ensnared by his own making. His words drip with desperation and regret, his confessions an elegy to lost souls. He writes of a haunted gaze that met his own in the darkness, a silent plea for mercy that he could not grant. The ship's voyage was not merely a passage through the ocean, but a descent into the darkest chambers of the human heart. Yet, amidst the despair, small acts of rebellion flickered like embers in the night. Some prisoners shared the scant water and food, their hands trembling but their spirits defiant. Secret prayers and whispered songs traveled through the shadows, threading hope through the fabric of desolation. These fragile connections, though easily crushed, were testaments to the unyielding will to survive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ship continued its grim journey, carrying with it the broken remnants of lives stolen and souls condemned. The ocean, vast and merciless, bore silent witness to the horrors within, swallowing secrets that would stain history with blood and sorrow. The voyage was far from over, and the nightmare of the Middle Passage would etch itself ever deeper into the bones of those who endured it, marking them forever with scars unseen but profound. The dawn broke with a pale light, spilling weakly over the deck, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to stretch from the very souls imprisoned below. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of death and despair, mingling with the salt and sweat that coated every surface, every living being aboard the cursed vessel. Captain Hawthorne, gaunt and hollow-eyed, stood motionless at the ship's railing, his gaze lost in the endless horizon, a horizon that promised neither salvation nor reprieve. Below, the hold had become a chamber of horrors beyond imagining. The prisoners, once vibrant with fear and hope, had been drained of life and spirit. Their bodies shriveled like wilted leaves pressed between the pages of a dark, unforgiving book. The air was thick with the cloying smell of sickness, rotting flesh, stale urine, and the ever-present metallic temps of blood. It clung to their lungs, each breath a desperate gasp for a mercy that would never come. Among the survivors, Amina lay on the wooden floor, her body ravaged by disease and exhaustion, but her mind still a fortress of fierce determination. She whispered stories of a distant home, a land where the sun bathed the earth in golden light, where children laughed and the earth bore fruit freely. Her voice, though faint, wove a tapestry of hope for those who dared to listen, a fragile thread in a web of darkness. The ship's surgeons moved mechanically, their faces masks of grim resolve and hidden revulsion. Their crude tools gleamed dully in the dim light, instruments of suffering rather than healing. They performed amputations with no anesthetic, stitched wounds that festered with infection, and dispensed potions brewed from herbs and poisons alike. The sick were separated from the dying, though the line between the two was often blurred in a haze of fever and delirium. Captain Hawthorne's mind spiraled deeper into madness, each night haunted by the cries and silence alike. He wrestled with his conscience, a conscience he long ago sought to bury beneath layers of duty, greed, and denial. He scribbled feverish entries in his journal, desperate to document the nightmare, yet aware that the world above would never comprehend the depths of this hell. His own hands trembled as he recounted the final moments of those he condemned, a litany of guilt and sorrow that would follow him beyond the grave. Tensions aboard the ship escalated as the crew's patience wore thin. Whispers of revolt turned to bitter arguments and fistfights, fueled by the unrelenting heat and the omnipresent presence of death. Men who had once been comrades became strangers, shadows of themselves haunted by the atrocities they witnessed and committed. The captain's iron grip tightened, but even he knew that his authority rested on a fragile thread, frayed by fear and desperation. Meanwhile, below deck, the prisoners clung to life by the thinnest of margins. Samuel, the boy who had once clutched his mother's shawl, now sat silent, eyes vacant, a ghost among the living. His small frame shivered with every breath, the life within him flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. Amina, noticing his fragile state, pressed what little water she had into his hands, a silent act of rebellion against the crushing despair. But the darkest moment was yet to come. One night, as a violent storm lashed the ship, the hold flooded with seawater, cold and merciless. The prisoners screamed, the cries of drowning souls lost beneath the roar of thunder and the crashing waves. Captain Hawthorne and his crew fought desperately to save the vessel, but the damage was done. The hold became a watery tomb for many, their bodies swept away into the abyss. As dawn rose, the ship limped forward, its timbers groaning under the weight of tragedy. The living moved like shadows, haunted by what they had seen and endured. The ocean, vast and indifferent, bore silent witness to the unraveling of humanity within this floating prison. The voyage's end was still a distant hope, yet the horrors it had wrought had already marked every soul aboard. The Middle Passage was not merely a journey across the sea. It was a descent into madness, a crucible of suffering that would scar history and memory alike. The sun hung low, a swollen, bleeding orb sinking into the unforgiving horizon as the ship, a drifting coffin, finally approached the shores of its cruel destination. The weary survivors shuffled on the deck, their bodies emaciated, minds fractured, souls shattered beyond repair. The cries of the dead seemed to echo through the salt-choked air, a mournful chorus that no prayer could quiet. Captain Hawthorne, once proud and resolute, was now a hollow spectre, haunted by every scream, every gasp, every lost life seared into his memory like a brand. Below deck, the hold was a graveyard of forgotten bodies, limbs tangled in the muck of death and disease. Rats, the very creatures once blamed for this inferno, scurried through the shadows, feasting on what remained, indifferent to the tragedy their presence had symbolized. The survivors who could still walk clung to the ship's rails, their eyes glazed with the numbness of those who have stared into the abyss and found no mercy. Among them, Amina stood trembling, the last ember of hope flickering within her battered heart. She had survived not only the merciless journey, but the darkness within men, their greed, cruelty, and despair. Her mind replayed the moments etched deep into her being, the stifling heat, the suffocating cries, the stench of death that clung to every breath, the futile prayers whispered into a silent sky. The The ship's arrival was met with cold efficiency. Chains clinked and orders barked. The remaining prisoners were herded like cattle, their identities stripped away, replaced by the cruel anonymity of bondage. Yet within their eyes, a spark endured, a defiant ember that no whip, no chain, no torment could extinguish. Captain Hawthorne's journal, the final record of this journey, ended with words, trembling between remorse and madness. We crossed the ocean, not merely to carry men, but to carry sin itself. A weight heavier than any anchor, a darkness that will consume all who gaze upon it. The Middle Passage was more than a passage of ships. It was a passage into the darkest recesses of the human soul. A voyage that revealed the capacity for cruelty and the resilience of hope. The story of those who endured, those who perished, and those who bore witness would echo through centuries. A haunting reminder of a history stained with blood, suffering, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. And as the waves swallowed the ship's wake, the silent ocean held within its depths the memories of countless souls, a solemn testament to the horror and endurance of the human spirit.